Very polite of you. Can you hear me at the back okay?
Yeah.
Nice, okay. So, thanks Rosie. Nice of you to clap when you haven't even heard whether I'm any good or not, but there you go. So, I'm used to training lots of media agencies, creative agencies, media owners and so forth. That's fine. I'll stick around at the end if you want to pick up any themes, but today I'm going to do a quick blast on this, the Ideas book. It's a little pocket book about how to run brainstorms decently and have a bunch of ideas and techniques so that you can get better ideas. Now, who's ever been to a totally crap brainstorm? Yes, exactly. So, what I'm going to do first, is just for 5 minutes or so, is rattle through 10 things you really should do before you even consider having a brainstorm or set one up. Who's been asked to run a brainstorm ever? Yeah, lots. And it's a daunting thing, and most people just thunder into a room and say, yeah, give me your best ideas, guys. And someone says, what's it about? And then there's a bit of vague mumbling. So, I'm going to go through 3 things. One is how to prepare properly. Then I'm going to give you a quick taster of half a dozen techniques to generate decent ideas. And then I'll make a few remarks at the end about what it's like living in and around ideas and creativity. Okay, so preparing properly. Has anyone ever done a brainstorm where actually there's no brief? Yeah. So unlikely to get a decent result there then, probably. Has anyone been asked to run one by a client when there is no brief? Yes, exactly. So your first port of call is what I call the briefing. Start is terribly, terribly simple, and I make no apology for that. We need to know what we're doing, why we're doing it, who it's aimed at, and then one or both of making the right statement or the right question. So either our objective is X, 1, singular. What's the maximum number of objectives you've ever been given?
9.
9. And that's probably only because the type size ran out on the chart.
They had subsets within those.
So you get subsets within the 9, so you can just amazing, right? So you can't have 9 objectives because you won't know what you're doing. So you either need 1 objective or the right statement. Our objective is to do X. And if you can't answer those questions, then you shouldn't proceed. And that's regardless of whether you're attacking the problem yourself or whether you're going to involve other people and potentially waste their time. So the first thing to do is work out the right medium. And in that context, I do not mean media. I mean what form are you going to take in order to solve your problem. And of course, the first box says do it yourself. And in busy times, if you can fix this thing yourself without prevailing on your colleagues, then please do that, because you'll reduce the number of meetings that go into their diary. I'm sure everyone will be pleased about that. If you need to collaborate, then the first thought is, should I phone a friend? Because if you've got a smart mate who knows about this stuff, pause, think, get the brief right, then call them and say, what's your best thought on X? And you might solve the problem immediately that way. Then, if that isn't enough, you might want to do a selective email challenge. And I've had brilliant results in the past where you say, right, I reckon these 3 or 4 people might have a very smart angle on this issue. I'm going to phrase it pithily in 1 sentence, ping it off to them, and see what they say back, and you'll be amazed, and it only takes them 30 seconds. So that's another way of not having a brainstorm. It gets much more complicated, of course, if you decide to have one, so that's what I'm going to get into next. And the first thing is the right people. Have you got the right people in there? Now, brainstorms, I don't know if anyone knows this, but they were invented in 1953 by Mr. Osborne of the BBDO network. And he invented them just to impress clients. It's as simple as that. Now, what's the sort of numbers of people that you tend to have in a brainstorm? Just shout out a figure. How many? 10? Anyone top 10? 15? Anyone top 15 in a brainstorm? Fine, okay, 15, probably because of the size of the room. But actually, the optimum number of people in a brainstorm is just 4. And in fact, all the creative studies show that it's even more effective if you send 4 smart people away to work individually. They are more likely to come up with better productive ideas than if they did it collectively. Which is not much fun in the collaborative, modern, touch-and-feely context, but that is what the statistics say. So, the fewer people, the better. Be very selective about the guest list, and don't accept substitutes. If you want Steve to come to your thing because he's good at this, then when Steve rings up and says, sorry, I'm sending Dave, you say, no, he can't come. I don't want Dave, I want Steve. You can be tough about it, otherwise you end up with people who aren't relevant to the task that you've set. Now, there's a lot written also about where you should conduct these things, and we call it the third place. It's certainly not the office. It's not in your house if you work at home. A lot of people have much better ideas elsewhere, and also doing different things. There's a lot written about this. For example, the higher the ceiling, the more ideas you get, weirdly, because people feel less fettered. If you paint everything blue, you get more ideas, because it reminds people of the sea and the sky and open areas. You need natural light and so forth. And a lot of the best inventions and ideas came when people were on the move. A number of times people say, I was walking the dog, I was on the rowing machine, that sort of thing. So some form of motion and difference is always conducive to better ideas. You also then can look at the right time. Now we can spend a lot of time on this, but I won't. Lots of businesses have rhythms, and they include what it's like at the beginning or end of day and all points in the middle, what it's like every Monday, because it's all status meetings, or Friday, because it's always timesheets, what it's like on certain months, because it's chaos at the beginning and the end, but a bit nicer in the middle. You can even do that for the whole year. You could have all your brainstorms for the whole of 2015 in 1 week, and probably cover 90% of what's going to crop up, because you know what's going to happen anyway. But actually you'll tend to leave it to the last minute. So you can actually predict those rhythms and get it right. And then of course you want to get the duration of your thing right. I'm not going to spend any time on that right now. But you also need some sort of method. Here's one that I've got called the brand bomb, which works really well. And what you do is you get everything that the company or brand has ever said about itself. That's the condensed view, and it's usually a blizzard of crap that contradicts itself. You then pose 2 or 3 sharp questions, which is the blob number 2 in the middle, where you ask the most senior people, your most senior client, your management, whoever, who are we, what are we trying to do, and what do we like to do business with? And you then ask the staff or the target audience exactly the same questions. Surprise, surprise, the answers are totally dissonant, and that gives you your working platform for the next stages to work out what you've got to do next. You need some sort of shape when you do a brainstorm. The next thing, as the runner of a brainstorm, is to provide the right stimulus. Now, a lot of people don't bother. They just breeze into a room with some papers and say, I've got an issue with X, what do you think? It's not good enough. You have to brief people in advance and say, I'm giving you this, I'm thinking about that, have a look at this, read this, understand that, and then we can have a fast, productive session. And if you think, I'm not sure whether they're going to bother to read that beforehand, then as well as setting them homework, you set them a test. And you set them a test at the beginning of the brainstorm. And if they can't answer the questions at the beginning, then you send them out of the room on the grounds they haven't done their homework. Because they are going to slow down your fast, productive meeting, because they don't actually know what they're talking about. And as the runner of the brainstorm, you can be that authoritative because it's your meeting and it's in everybody's interest to be highly productive. And finally, on the preparation front, these are what I call examples of rules of engagement. Things that we should and shouldn't do, ways we should and shouldn't behave in a brainstorm. Here, for example, break with the past. In other words, you don't want people sitting around saying, there's no point in doing that because we tried that 3 years ago and it didn't work. We don't want any of those. Productive listening, please. Brevity equals intelligence. The shorter it is, the better it is. We can do a whole away day on that one. Take the issues seriously, but not yourself. Very pompous, serious people in meetings explaining how brilliant they are, which is why you're not allowed to have showboating. We don't want people being cynical, using jargon. And my favourite, which is no show, no say. Has anyone ever been in a brainstorm and come up with a bunch of really exciting stuff, only to have the person who's more senior that couldn't be bothered to turn up reject it all? Yeah, a few nods. Yeah, so I like no show, no say. If you don't turn up, you don't have any say on the outcome of this thing. So that's 10 ultra-fast things you can do to prep properly. And in large creative organisations such as this, I would always recommend that you should have 10 to 20 authorised brainstorm troopers, as I call them, per 100 staff, who can do this stuff so that you can go out, do them impressively in front of clients, do them smartly internally, and, dare I say, start charging for them as products. Now, so I'm going to rattle through half a dozen quick techniques, things you can do to get ideas going. There are 25 of them in here. I'm going to give you a flavour. So the first one I call 3 good, 3 bad. And this is a technique that you use when you suspect that either some of the attendees are going to be negative, or you've got some negative components in the brief. In other words, this product is shit, what are we going to do? Yeah? So what you do with 3 good, 3 bad is you ask everybody in the room, without saying a word, to write down the 3 best things about the brief, or product, or service, or brand, and the 3 worst. And what's fascinating about this is, first of all, they're not allowed to compare notes, because the moment you ask one person, then someone else will say, oh god, yeah, this really is bad, and before you know it, you're in a downward spiral. Instead, it's done silently. If you have 10 people in the room, say, you might expect that you're going to get 30 bad and 30 good, but you don't. Typically you get 6 to 8 of each. And what you then do is you put up 6 good, 6 bad, and you either net the one off against the other, or you take the good stuff and use that as your springboard, or if it's really that bad, you take the bad stuff and say, how are we going to fix this? Okay, so one way or another you do that, and it's critical, by the way, that you time limit that exercise, so that there's only a tiny fraction at the beginning of the session which is in any way negative. From then on, it's all positive. Okay? That's 3 good, 3 bad. Now, this is think inside the box. Now, who's used the phrase, let's think outside the box? Anyone use that phrase? Anyone knows what it means? Give us all your bad, wacky ideas, guys. If they're rubbish, they can't be used. And so, what actually happens is that when you've got a suitably bounded subject area with constraints, all the creative studies show that you get far better productive ideas. A classic simple idea would be, we have no money, what should we do? Now, have you seen Apollo 13 with Tom Hanks? You know that film? Okay, so a nice little metaphor, if you like, of thinking inside the box is when his command module blows up, he's going to die of monoxide poisoning, and there's nothing apparently in the command capsule that's going to save his life. So the people down in Houston, if you remember the scene, maybe you do, they think, what's he got there? They get all the stuff out of the warehouse, and the guy says, right, we've got to get this round filter into this triangular thing just using this. And he chucks a box full of crap on the table, and then they work at it with a lot of tape, and they work out how to do it and describe it. That's a metaphor for what is this that we have at our disposal that is a suitably bounded set of things within which we can think, not come up with a bunch of wacky stuff that is rubbish and just gets chucked in a drawer and never implemented. So, think inside the box. Here's a third one, called a category stealing. Terribly simple. If everything in your market is sort of samey, say, oh God, I've been working on banking for 5 years, I've been working on telecom, boring, same old rhythm. Say, right, okay, let's identify other categories and let's consider how would they approach this brief. How would an automotive brand launch this banking product? How would a telecoms brand approach this fashion retail issue, etc.? And you keep pushing the categories around to come up with different perspectives. If you want to be more specific about it, you can also do it by brands. Typically people say, right, how would Apple do this? How would Virgin do this? How would Orange do this? And so forth. Okay. If you're stuck in a rut, some of the best ideas come from what we call conceptual blending. So here's an example where on the left you've got old-fashioned stick block deodorant. That idea, combined with the dispense mechanism of a biro, a ballpoint pen, led to the idea of roll-on deodorant. A lot of ideas come from that interesting step, and I'll tell you in a minute about how you try to stimulate your own mind to get used to often making steps of that type. It's always about asking questions. The guy who invented Velcro did it after he took his job for a walk, and he was really fascinated by how the little seeds got stuck in his dog's hair. And when he looked at it closely under a microscope, he saw these little hooks. He then invented a nylon-like substance which emulated those hooks, and that's how he invented Velcro. He's taking one thing and applying it somewhere else. Now, if the brief's always the same, and what's the longest brief you've ever had? Just shout out. Let's say in a Word file. Just shout out a figure.
10 pages.
10 pages. Can anyone top 10 pages of Word file rubbish? I'm getting a nod at the back. Name a figure bigger than 10.
18.
Oh.
18.
How long are your briefs usually?
20. Yeah.
Okay, there we go, so that's 20. Right. Now, when it was in the days of, let's say, Maggie Thatcher, when she'd get all these briefing things, she used to go through with a highlighter pen till about 5 o'clock in the morning. That was the old way of doing it. The new way I do is take Stuart's 20 pages, drop them into Wordle.net, and you get a pictogram of emphasis with regard to all the words that are in it. And then you've got two fantastic strategic choices. One is, I see all these words here, and they're really shit. I'm going to come up with something far more distinctive. And the other is, I see all these, thank you, I now have a centre of gravity for 20 pages of crap. And you can do exactly the same with 80 pages of PowerPoint. So that is the modern, fast way of getting to the epicentre of a brief, when your client has just word dumped a whole lot on you. And that works really effectively, okay? Now, what we do then is extract, if you like, 4 interesting words from the brief which appear to form the core of it, and write one each on 4 flip charts. It's got one, it's there. Okay? Just one. So, somebody shout out a market, any market.
Banking.
Banking, right? Okay, so in banking, somebody shout out a crucial strategic characteristic of a banking product. We need 4.
Trust.
Trust. Keep going.
Reliability.
Security. Reliability. Price.
Value, yeah.
Value, yeah. Okay, so trust, reliability, security, price. You write just those words on one big chart, stick them in all 4 corners of the room, give everybody a pen, and you say, right, Rosie, can you go up to that? She sees trust, she writes on it, moves on. Laura comes around the corner, writes on it, moves on, and so on and so on. And you could go all the way around the room, doesn't take very long, until all the sheets are finished, and then you stick them back. And what's really, really interesting is that you'll find interesting departures, but with 2 crucial components, I think. Number one is, it's always strategically rooted, because by definition the words only emanated from the central strategic word in the middle of the chart, so they never depart in really odd ways, but they are interesting. And secondly, particularly for doing with clients, you immediately get a working version of how one person's thought builds on another, builds on another, builds on another. So it's very, very good for bonding and morale and what you might call co-authorship of the brief or the ideas, thereby increasing the chances that your client will not reject them because actually they play the part of inventing it. It's very hard to reject your own stuff, if you see what I mean. Right, so those are half a dozen fast examples. Just to let you know, in 2 charts, there are all sorts of other techniques in the book which cover things like this. If the perspective's too narrow, if we always express our ideas verbally and it's always too samey, the language is the same, if we haven't got enough to go on, if we always seem to have a fixed point of view on the same brand or product, if we always seem to be compromising, if we need a new jumping off point, if we need something more wacky, if we don't really know much about it or we know too much, ignoring anomalies and so forth because people like conformity. All these things can be attended to by techniques that are in the book. So if you have any briefs that struggle with issues of that type, the book can help. Okay? I'm just going to do a few charts to finish about living with ideas and creativity because it is a frame of mind, if you like. And once you get into it, then all this stuff becomes proportionally easier. So, first of all, here's a chart based on what if nothing happens first. Okay? Now, I don't know if any of you have ever had a relationship like this. There you go. Alright, so this is what we call the unconcealing. So you start off deeply excited, you see, and you think, great, I've got this new thing. And then nothing happens, no ideas appear. So you get into this sort of stumped phase. But don't panic, because actually what's happened is you've briefed your depth mind. And something will emerge a little bit later, particularly if you go off and do something else. And sometimes that only takes 5 minutes, but it might take half a day or something. The more you sit and stare at something and try and crack it, the worse it will get, probably. So you're best off going to do something else. There's a lot more about that. Now, you can't make ideas happen, but what you can do is train the manner in which you view the world. So if you're constantly curious, be what they call a junk collector. Have notebooks full of stuff, interesting things, go to art museums, what have you, look at different stimulus. You're a sort of mental magpie, and it's what they call practicing serendipity, because in fact when people say, oh, that was lucky. You had a great piece of a great idea. That was a bit of luck. Not really, actually, because I was thinking about that. And then when this piece of stimulus came in, I attached the two things. That's what they call creativity. Okay? Now, a lot of ideas get diluted. I call it being pecked to death by ducks. Okay? So you start off with something and it's really good in its raw form. And then someone says, tell you what, though, could you just shave 10% off there? Could you do that a little bit smaller? Can you just change that from a thing? And before you know it, it's just the lowest common denominator piece of wibble that anyone could have done. So what we want is, if you like it, trust your instinct, leave it alone, unsullied, and then dedicate your time to thinking, what can I sacrifice elsewhere so that I can overcommit to this thing and really do it properly? Then you've got a pure, excellent idea. Two final remarks on this. One is, when you've got far too many ideas and it's getting a bit political and overheated, I would always recommend post-it voting. And this is particularly true if you are in a, let's say, an all-day, let's say a multi-agency away day, yeah, and there's 500 ideas keep popping out, and all the blokes from Saatchi's just keep trying to prevail with theirs or something. Every 20 minutes, post-it voting. What do you think of this? Well, do your best three. Do your best three. Think. Carl, right, all that shit, out. Those, are these any good? Right, that's better. Right, okay, thank you. Suddenly then you've got another 58 ideas. Most of them are rubbish. Post-it vote. Vote all day to keep trimming the rubbish out. And the nice thing about that, it is not you dictating that that is rubbish. It is the collective will and judgment of everybody, and that's a much more powerful way to make the best stuff come to the top. And finally, if the idea is okay but not that great, often in meetings I'll produce kill it cards, and you have a limited number per attendee and you can play them when you want. And when things have got horribly out of hand, you think, I can't believe this. We've just spent 45 minutes discussing something that's clearly crap. I'm going to play the kill it card. Yeah, bang, sorry, I feel very strongly about it. This is rubbish. And you get one chance a meeting, question mark, and tell other meetings. So if it's really bad, kill it. So there we go. So I'm now going to kill this presentation. Thank you for listening. I'm just going to do a mini plug and say, right, I've got 20 copies of this. So in a mad scramble, but without killing each other, the first people to the table can have those. And there's all sorts of other stuff that I do. So for example, the diagrams book, these are the 50 best diagrams in the world. That's interesting, particularly for planners and designers. I've got things like Tick Achieve, how to get stuff done. This is to cope with your blizzard of stuff you have to deal with at work. I've got Greatest Hits, which is, there's 250 books summarised here. This is where I read all the business books and summarise them so you don't have to read them. It makes you look more intelligent with clients. So if you want to discuss any of those, just come and call me. Thank you very much.